Okay, so get ready, because today we are diving into global economic inequality, and we're dissecting this Oxfam report, Public Good or Private Wealth.
Yeah.
It is really something.
It's a big one.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's really eye-opening. They start out with this crazy statistic about how the combined wealth of just 26 people
Yeah.
equals that of 3.8 billion people.
It's incredible, isn't
It's
it?
like half the planet.
Yeah, it's a mind-boggling statistic, really, and I think it just underscores the incredible scale of the problem.
Yeah, and it's not like a static thing either.
Right.
The report talks about how over the past decade there's been this like boom time for billionaires.
Yeah.
Where like on average every single day these billionaires are seeing their wealth increase by an average of $2.5 billion.
Every day.
Every day with a B.
It's a stark contrast to what we see on the other end of the spectrum, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where, billionaire wealth is absolutely skyrocketing, but the number of people living in extreme poverty, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, is actually on the rise.
Yeah, it's like two completely different realities.
Yeah.
And speaking of realities, one of the things I really appreciated about this report is they really try to put a human face on these statistics. They talk about, for example, Mukesh Ambani, who's the richest person in India,
Yes.
and he lives in this like billion-dollar skyscraper in Mumbai.
Yeah, a 27-story skyscraper.
And they contrast that with the story of Pradama.
Yes, a stark reminder of the human cost of inequality.
Yeah, and just to give you a little background, Pradama is the woman from a very poor area of Patna, India. And she tragically lost her twin babies because she couldn't get adequate health care.
And it really highlights the way that inequality manifests as a real world, It's not just about this massive gap in wealth. It's about the unequal access to these basic necessities.
Not really.
Whether it's healthcare, education, the chance to raise a family.
And Pradama's story is sadly not unique.
Yeah.
The report also talks about Roberta,
Yeah.
who was a police officer in Kenya. And she also, like, tragically, her twins died shortly after birth.
Awful.
But then to make matters even worse, because she couldn't afford to pay the medical bills, she was actually held captive by the hospital.
These stories are really hard to hear, but they are so important because they underscore those very real human consequences
Absolutely.
of inequality. It's not just, we're not talking about GDP
Right.
or some kind of abstract economic indicator. We're talking about real lives, real families
Yeah.
who are tragically impacted by this.
Yeah. And it's not even just about like immediate suffering or anything like that.
Right.
The report really emphasizes how inequality robs people of opportunities
Yeah.
and stifles their potential. They talk about this student, a brilliant student from Malawi named Chimwemwe,
Yeah.
who dreamed of going to college, but her family just couldn't afford it.
Yeah. A stark reminder of how inequality perpetuates those cycles of disadvantage.
Yeah, and it's not even just a loss for her, it's a loss for like society as a whole.
Exactly.
Like how much potential is being wasted worldwide because of these like systemic inequalities.
Yeah. And the report actually makes the point that this level of inequality, it's not inevitable.
Right.
It's a choice.
Okay.
It's a result of the policies and systems that we've chosen to prioritize.
So if we're talking about choices, like what are some alternatives?
Yeah.
What can we do differently?
One of the key solutions that the report highlights is investing in universal public services.
Okay, so you mean like free healthcare
Yeah.
and education for everyone.
Exactly.
I have to admit that sounds pretty ambitious.
It's a huge undertaking.
Is that even feasible on a global scale?
It would be challenging, there's no doubt about it, but the report argues that it's not only possible, but it's actually essential for creating a more just and equitable world.
Interesting.
And they actually point to examples of countries that have successfully implemented various forms of universal public services.
Yeah.
Places like Costa Rica, Sri Lanka, Thailand.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah,
Thailand has like healthcare for their entire population.
they do. Thailand's healthcare system is a really interesting example of universal healthcare in action.
Wow.
They rolled out universal health coverage back in 2002, and now it covers their entire population of 65 million people.
65 million.
Yeah.
That's incredible. How do they even how is that even possible? How do they fund that?
So it's a publicly funded system.
Okay.
It's primarily financed through a progressive taxation system.
Progressive taxation. So you mean like where the wealthier you are, the higher percentage of your income you pay in taxes.
Exactly.
Ah.
And the results really speak for themselves since implementing universal health care. Thailand has seen really remarkable improvements in key health indicators. particularly among the poorest segments of society.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a really powerful testament to like the potential of these kinds of universal public services.
Yeah,
But I mean, the report acknowledges it's not always like smooth sailing, right?
of course.
Like I know we often hear about like public services, especially in like developing countries, struggling with issues like underfunding
Mm-hmm.
and quality.
Absolutely.
So how do they address that?
They acknowledge those challenges straight up, and they emphasize that it's not enough to simply have these universal services in place. They need to be high quality, they need to be adequately funded, and they need to be designed to effectively meet the needs of everyone, particularly the most vulnerable populations.
That makes sense.
Yeah, women and girls.
So we've got providing these universal public services, particularly in healthcare and education, but obviously those cost money.
Yeah.
Which brings us to, I think, one of the like most hotly debated topics in this whole conversation around inequality,
Of course.
taxation.
Oh, it's a big one.
So what does the report have to say about that?
Well, they don't shy away from this at all. They make a very bold case for significantly increasing taxes on the super rich and corporations.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Break it down for me.
Why?
Why higher taxes on the wealthy?
So they back up their argument with some pretty striking statistics.
Okay.
For example, did you know that globally, only 4 cents out of every dollar of tax revenue comes from taxes on wealth?
4 cents on the dollar from wealth.
4 cents.
That's it.
That's it.
I had no idea it was that low.
It's a figure that tends to surprise a lot of people.
Wow.
And it gets even more concerning when you dig a little deeper.
Okay.
The report found that the top rates of personal income tax, corporate tax, and inheritance tax have actually been on the decline in many wealthy nations over the past few decades.
So wait a minute.
Yeah.
The people in corporations who can most afford to contribute
Yeah.
are actually paying a smaller percentage of their income in taxes than they used to.
That's right.
That doesn't seem right.
And that's exactly the point that the report is making.
Okay.
They argue that this trend of decreasing tax rates for the wealthy has severely limited the resources available to fund things like universal public services.
Yeah.
And this is especially problematic for developing nations
Right.
that are already grappling with limited resources.
It's like a vicious cycle.
It is.
Less tax revenue means fewer resources for public services. Yeah. Which then perpetuates inequality,
Exactly.
which makes it even harder to break free.
It makes it very difficult.
And on top of that, it's not even just about like domestic tax policies either.
Right.
There's the whole issue of tax havens
Yeah.
and corporations shifting their profits to avoid paying taxes.
Huge issue. And the report tackles that head on.
Okay.
They don't mince words.
Yep.
They estimate that trillions of dollars are being stashed away in offshore tax havens, costing governments, particularly in developing countries, billions upon billions of dollars in lost tax revenue every year.
It's crazy to think about how much money is out there
It's a huge amount.
that could be going towards solving some of these problems.
Yeah, it's a point of significant contention.
Right.
But the report argues that cracking down on these practices is absolutely crucial for creating a fairer and more just global tax system.
Okay.
And they highlight that this isn't just like a radical fringe idea. Even some of the wealthiest individuals in the world are starting to speak out about the need for a more equitable approach to taxation.
Oh, really? Like who?
Well, they actually quote Bill Gates in the report,
Okay.
which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
He surprised a lot of people when he came out and said, I'm a huge fan of the estate tax.
The estate.
The estate tax, because he said it creates a certain dynamism where you don't just get an aristocratic type view.
Wow. That is quite a statement coming from Bill Gates.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
One of the world's wealthiest individuals.
Yeah, it seems like there's at least like a growing recognition
I think so.
that maybe things need to change.
Yeah.
So I feel like we've talked about the problem,
Yeah.
the human cost,
Mm-hmm.
and some potential solutions.
Yeah.
Like, are we headed towards a dystopian future, or is there like a path towards a more equitable future?
It's the $1 million question, right? And I think, the report doesn't sugarcoat the enormity of the challenge, but I think ultimately it offers a message of like cautious optimism.
Okay.
They really emphasize that like the current trajectory isn't set in stone.
Okay.
It is a choice.
But if it's a choice, like how do we actually shift course?
Right.
How do we move from a world that's defined by this extreme inequality to one where we have like, they call it a human economy?
Yeah, that's the heart of the matter, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think the report really stresses that creating this human economy, one that prioritizes, well-being and shared prosperity over just this kind of like relentless pursuit of individual wealth, it requires a fundamental shift in our thinking.
I'm all for a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
But how do we translate that into like tangible action?
Well, they emphasize that it's going to require a multi-pronged approach. It's going to take a collective effort
Okay.
from individuals, governments, institutions,
Mm-hmm.
but they do lay out some concrete steps. For one thing, they call for a dramatic increase in investments in those universal public services that we talked about earlier.
Right.
Healthcare, education,
Yeah.
robust social safety nets. And they argue that, these aren't just expenses. These are essential investments in human potential.
But, we have to be realistic. Like, these investments, they require substantial funding.
Yeah,
Governments are often strapped for resources.
right.
So didn't the report also talk about tax reform?
They make a very strong case for like completely overhauling the global tax system.
Okay.
Closing those loopholes that we talked about, cracking down on the use of tax havens, implementing fairer tax policies that require the wealthiest individuals and corporations to actually pay their fair share.
That's a bold vision.
That's-
I mean, are people even going to be on board with that?
It's definitely going to face resistance,
Yeah.
but they point to a growing global movement that is pushing for these kinds of changes.
Interesting.
More and more people from everyday citizens to influential figures like Bill Gates are recognizing that the status quo is simply unsustainable. Yeah.
They're demanding a more just and equitable economic system that works for everyone.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive.
It has.
It really has.
A lot to think about.
We'd love to hear your reflections on this episode. What resonated with you? What questions are still swirling around in your mind? Head over to our social media pages and share your thoughts with us. And don't forget to like and follow us so you don't miss out on future deep dives where we unpack more complex issues just like this. Until next time.